Hi, this is David with NTI Online, and today I'm going to walk you through cascading the TFTN boiler. Now this boiler has just been powered up, and we're going to start by removing the jumper wires that come from the factory. These are there to do testing. What you're going to do is when you cascade this, you're going to replace these jumpers with your thermostat or your end switch or your zone controls. And we're just going to remove those so that the boiler doesn't try and fire up while we're working on it. One thing that is different with the TFTN to our previous products is the wiring that gets done for the Cascade is done last. If you start by doing the Cascade wiring, it's going to create problems for you and make it more difficult. So leave these connections empty until you've done all the programming. Do that last, and then we'll reset the power. And once our boiler's finished booting up, I'll show you how to program the Cascade. Now that our boiler is fully booted up, we need to go into Setup. We're going to go to Tech menu, and the keyboard is going to pop up. The password is NTI net. If you've previously logged in, this won't pop up the second time. Now that we're logged in, we touch Cascade Setup, and the first thing we need to do is set a managing boiler. So we're going to touch this box next to boiler address. We're going to change this to manager and press OK. Now that we've done that, the boiler is going to reboot. This process will take 4 to 5 minutes. And while this is rebooting, we can move to our second boiler and start setting that one. So we've now moved over to follower boiler number 1. This is already boot up, and I've already removed the 3 jumper wires. So we're going to click Setup, Tech menu. If you need to log in, the password is NTI net. I've already logged into this one, so I'm going to go to Cascade Setup, and I'm going to touch where it says single boiler and make this follower number 1. Once you do this, the boiler is going to go through a partial reboot. And you may have heard that the fan just kicked on. The boiler now believes that it's part of a Cascade, but does not see any Cascade wiring, so it's gone into an emergency mode. So we're going to click OK. It's going to ask us to confirm that we made the change or to save the change. Once we've done that, it's going to back up its settings. When you see this screen, power the boiler down by turning it off. One thing you do need to do to all follower boilers is you're going to remove the front cover with the display. You're going to find the Wi-Fi cable, and you need to disconnect that. And my recommendation is that you completely remove this, because you don't want another technician to follow behind you and then reconnect that, because it will cause problems. If you leave it connected, you'll get a bus collision error. Now that the Wi-Fi is disconnected, you need to go to this circuit board off to the side here. This is the zone control board. You're going to find these 2 dip switches, 1 and 2, and you're going to push these all the way to the right-hand side. Now, from the factory, these have a little bit of plastic that covers them, so they can be sticky. So peel the plastic off first and just make sure they're flipped to the right. And that is your follower boiler set up. Next, we'll move to follower boiler number 2, and this procedure on follower boiler 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 is the same for each additional boiler. Now that we're on our 3rd boiler, we're going to start by hitting Setup, Tech menu. The password is NTI net if you need to log in. We're going to go to Cascade Setup, boiler address, and now this is follower boiler number 2. Press OK, and the boiler is going to reboot. We're going to press OK, confirm that we made the selection, press OK again. and we're going to keep the boiler address and PCB settings. And now that you're here, you can power the boiler off. On follower boilers number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, you need to remove the display cover here. You're going to unplug and remove the Wi-Fi harness, set it to one side. You also want to go up here to the zone control board and disconnect the eBus wiring connection. That's the process for all follower boilers after you've done number 1. Now that all of our cascaded boilers are configured, we're going to go back to the managing boiler, and you can tell it's properly configured because it says manager up top here. We don't require any more configuration immediately, but what we are going to do is wire the boilers. So you're going to go down to the bottom right hand side where you see bus, B, and T. Remove the electrical connector, and you're going to insert 18-2 or similar wire and screw these down firmly, and then install this back into the boiler. So these are polarity sensitive, so you want B to go to B on the second boiler, T to go to T on the next boiler. So we're going to plug that in. Once you've wired all 3 boilers, you're going to turn everything back on. The boilers should discover each other, and you've now set the cascade. So in order to show you what this is going to happen on the screen, I'm going to turn the master off and back on, and we'll know that it's speaking to the follower number 1 because this will change from 3 zones to 6 zones. Now that we have the bus communication wiring between all the boilers set up, we can tell that the manager is communicating with follower 1 because we have 6 zones available down the bottom here. We're going to go into setup, go back into tech menu, log in if you need to. NTI net is the password. We're going to go into pump control settings. We're going to go down to auxiliary pump 1 selection. Right now it's set for none. And in most cases, the system pump is going to be used for a cascade, so we'll select that and save it by pressing OK. You do have some other options in here. You could make this a domestic hot water recirculation pump or a buffer tank pump if that's the system you're choosing. Select this appropriate to the needs of your system. If you want more details on what these settings mean, touch the info button and it gives you a description in here of what these do. Now that we've set the system pump, we also need to select our sensor. So we're going to go to sensor configuration, auxiliary sensor 1, and in most cases this is going to be a system sensor. However, there are a large number of applications where you may also use buffer tank, but for today we're going to set system sensor and we're going to press OK. Now that we've changed those 2 settings, all of the normal boiler settings for central heating maximum and minimum are going to be done in your regular tech menu under central heating setup. Under your zone selection here, you now have the availability of 6 different zones plus a buffer tank. Set these appropriate to the needs of your system. That completes the cascade configuration. Let's complete the wiring next. On your managing boiler, you need to make several different wiring changes. The first one you're going to do is find this jumper wire. Now from the factory, this jumper is loose and you need to either connect this to zone input and R or zone input and 120 volts. What this is doing is selecting the power that comes out of your different zones here. These can either be 24 or 120 volts. For this application, I've selected that I want 120 volts to come out of the zones, so I'm going to reconnect this, tighten this screw down, and now when we call on thermostat 1, zone 1 will send 120 volts out through the appropriate screw contact. Off on the left-hand side here, we've got auxiliary pump 1 and auxiliary pump 2. We selected auxiliary pump 1 as our system circulator, so we would wire the line and the neutral to our system circulator here and then to the ground screw. For the sensor configuration, off on the right-hand side, we've got auxiliary NTC 1. we're going to remove this, take the wires for our system sensor. These are not polarity sensitive, and we're going to install the system sensor to auxiliary NTC1. If you're using an outdoor sensor, it will be connected to the managing boiler here. If you're using a tank in the system, if it's a downstream tank, then you would hook the aquastat or the temperature sensor to the red NTC DHW contact. For an upstream tank, you would connect to this same connection here. However, the settings in the boiler will be different. That concludes the basic setup and wiring for your Cascade system. Again, you can see the 6 zones here, and if we move over to our follower boiler, you'll notice the display on that one has also changed. Once your follower boilers are configured, you're going to see that the screen has changed. There are no longer options for different zones here. If we go into Setup, Tech menu, we'll log back in, NTI Net. You'll notice that under your zone selection, you don't have zones to select anymore, and that's because as a follower boiler, all of the zone settings come from the managing boiler. When it comes to wiring zones 3, 4, 5, and 6, those can go or must go to the follower boiler number 1. If you want to use 6 zones with your managing boiler, zones 4, 5, and 6 are going to connect to follower boiler 1 using T-stat 1, 2, and 3. The settings for these are set on the manager boiler. The pump outputs remain with this boiler here, which is always follower number 1. Other than additional zones, nothing wires to the follower boiler, with the exception of a boiler pump in most cases and the bus wiring. And that concludes the setup for cascading your TFTN boilers. If you have any questions, please contact NTI at 800-688-2575.